By the 1940s, lenses had been developed to the stage where good close-ups were commonplace. Film was shot and edited to enhance and complement the action. Film stock was relatively cheap by then, and cricket was still enormously popular, so there's good coverage from the era. One problem, though, is that sound was sometimes kept on separate reels, and it wasn't always as carefully looked after as the vision. Unfortunately, some of the sound reels have been damaged or lost, so the original sound isn't always available. One of the first games filmed after the war was between a Services 11 and a New South Wales team captained by Bill O'Reilly. Here, Lindwall is bowling to Lindsay Hassett. And Lindwall to R.S. Whitington, the cricket writer.
Ray was a beautiful bowler in the way that he controlled the swing of that new ball. He had every facet under his control. He bowled a beautiful Yorker. He bowled a very good bouncer. And although he wasn't very tall, he used to make it get up and it used to skid off the pitch, and they seemed to have great trouble in picking it up. I would rate Ray as one of the all-time great fast bowlers, and in addition to that, he was a very good batsman. He's been very much underrated. A fine batsman.
Keith Miller was playing for the Services team. Lindwall bowling to Miller. And now O'Reilly to Miller.
Keith, of course, was a better batsman than Ray, and at times, when he was in the mood, Keith could be an absolutely devastating fast bowler as well. But it was better to use him in relatively short bursts, you know, give him 3 or 4 overs at a time. Keith was also an outstanding slip field, and he too was one of the great all-rounders that's played the game. Marvellous cricketer.
I was selected as captain in 1946 to go to New Zealand. We had I consider, a very good side. It was Ken Muirland from Victoria, Keith Miller was in the side, Ray Lindwall, Bill O'Reilly, Ernest Toshak, Colin McCool, Ian Johnson. We had a pretty good lineup. We played one test, and when Wal Hadley, who was the New Zealand captain, and I went out to toss, the wicket was wet, very wet. And I said, well, we give it time to dry out a bit, Wal. And he said, no, I want to start straight away. Now, I'm not quite sure what he had in mind, but I think he wanted to nullify Ray Lindwall anyway. So I said, oh, well, okay. So we tossed. He won the toss, and I thought, well, here we go. He said, we'll bat.
The sun shines brightly on Wellington's Basin Reserve, but for the New Zealand team, prospects are far from bright, after being routed for 42 in their first innings. Australia has 3 down for 146 as Hassett and Miller go to the crease. The wicket is still damp and crumbling. It's cleverly to Miller. Miller drives into the on and they go through for 3. Today, Cowie is the only bowler who can keep them quiet. Burke, the Auckland spin bowler, to McCool, who square cuts him but fails to get it away.
We batted and we got reasonable score. I think might have been 200. And they went in and they managed about another 50 in their second innings. Again, O'Reilly was the main destroyer. So we won fairly comfortably, but we were fortunate in that we got the best of the conditions.
O'Reilly takes over from Lindwall to send down the type of bowling that has made him famous. He gets 3 easy victims. Cleverly pulls Toshak round to the on for a single that brings the total to 43, 1 more than last time. Though they get a few runs, none of the batsmen are happy against the steady Australian attack. The match is almost over, the first test between Australia and New Zealand to be played since 1928. McRae skies one round to square leg off McCool, but Muirman is there to collect it. And New Zealand is beaten by an innings and 103 runs. For New Zealand players, there were plenty of lessons to learn.
Later in 1946, Don Bradman decided to resume his cricket career. Apart from Bill Brown and Lindsay Hassett and Sid Barnes, who'd been to England in 1938, Bradman found himself playing with a new generation of cricketers.
Talon's forte was the fact that he was so certain in everything that he did, and he was like absolute lightning behind the stumps. And his anticipation on the leg side was the best of anyone I ever saw.
The England team that came to Australia in 1946-47 relied mainly on experience. The captain, Walter Hammond, had first played here in 1928. And the fast bowler Bill Vose had come to Australia in 1932 under Douglas Jardine. In Brisbane, Australia made 645, and England was caught on a wet wicket and lost by an innings. In Sydney, England won the toss and batted first. Miller bowling to Hutton. Hutton takes a single from Miller. And Bill Edrich gets 4 from the left-arm spinner George Tribe. Hammond is nearly stumped off McCool. Then he edges and is caught by Talon. Talon again, Yardley caught behind off Ian Johnson. England were all out for 255. Walter Hammond leads England out. Morris and Barnes. Alec Bedser bowling to Barnes. Barnes again, this time facing the English leg spinner Peter Smith. The old Sydney Hill had plenty of character, but it was no place to be caught in a thunderstorm. That was an unhappy tour for the English captain Walter Hammond. It was said that, for the sake of his reputation, it would have been better if he hadn't made the tour.
It's easy to look back and say in retrospect what should have happened or what should not have happened. I don't think it's quite fair to Wally to exercise that judgment on him. And I think he made a great effort to do what he thought was the right thing for the game of cricket and to get it started again after the war. The fact that he failed is unfortunate, but I think he did the right thing to come.
After the rain, Miller made 40. But when Bradman came in with a score at 159 for 4 wickets, it looked as if England had some chance. England played 2 leg spinners in this test. Here's Doug Wright bowling to Bradman. Bill Edrich to Sid Barnes. The next wicket fell at 564. Bradman and Barnes had put on 405, and that still stands as the highest 5th wicket partnership in tests. Both batsmen made 234.
This has always been a great talking point. Sid made the claim that he got out at 234, so that his score would be the same as mine. I will never know the truth, and nobody else will ever know the truth, but my hunch is that it was not so. He didn't mean to get out at all, but he did. No, I don't know. I'll never know the answer.
Australia won the Sydney Test by an innings. England did better in Melbourne and Adelaide. Those tests were drawn, but by then Australia had retained the Ashes. Against India in the 1947-48 season, Don Bradman scored his 100th century in first-class cricket. The Australian team at that time was unchallenged as the best in the world. Cricket then was still the national sport. The West Indies and South Africa had some great players, but nothing like the overall strength of the Australian team. And Pakistan had become a separate nation only a few months before the Indian tour began in 1947. Having beaten England 3-0 in 46-47, Australia won the 1947-48 series against India by 4 tests to 0.
That was the first time that an Indian tour had ever taken place in Australia. They were a useful side without being a great side. They had a few individual players who performed well. Amarnath, the captain, for instance, played a very great innings on the Melbourne Cricket Ground. They had Mancat in the side, who was rated very highly as a world-class all-round player, but they didn't have the depth in the side, and really they were not quite good enough to match Australia, but they were a pleasant lot of fellows. They thoroughly enjoyed the tour. They appreciated the opportunity to play in Australia. Great sportsmen, and it was a very happy and very successful year.
The use of close-ups and slow motion and the ability to freeze the action was to cause a problem before the start of the tour to England in 1948. Analysis of Ray Lindwell's action showed that he sometimes overstepped the mark, and there was concern that he'd be no-balled by the English umpires.
I knew the team was coming up, and I said to my mother, I said, I'm going for a game of golf. I sort of can't stand to sit and listen to the team come out. And I did that. Jogged off on my own. I put the golf clubs on the handlebars of the push bike, actually, and went down and had a round of golf. And of course, when I came home, Mum was sort of hanging over the front fence, you know. So I knew exactly what had happened, and I think she was more delighted than I was. And Sammy lost the night having a game of deck tennis. Ray Lindwell on the right and Bill Johnson on the left. Doug Green having a sleep. There's the skipper. I had this cricket on board, they used to put the nets up and they used to play with rope balls. The crew used to make rope balls, and they used to soak them in water, a bucket of water at the bowler's end, so they slide off the deck a bit quicker. And the bat used to be 2 inches wide rather than the 4 inches that we, 4.25 inches, which is allowed now. So they were narrow bats and wet rope balls.
I would like at the outset to refer particularly to the message which has come along from His Majesty the King.
I'd announced before I agreed to go to England that I would go, but made it very clear that that would be my last tour, and I would retire from cricket at the end of the 48 season. So for me it was a pretty emotional business right from the word go.
We are pleased to see the movie cameras for one very special reason. Because of the functions which have been arranged for us, we haven't got time to write to our wives.
When we went down to Worcester for the very first match on the tour, I can recall as well as anything, I took a suitcase full of unopened mail, and 2 of the players and myself sat in the railway carriage and did nothing all the way to Worcester but open up these letters. Before we played the first match, I went to the umpire and I said, now, Ray Lindwell's going to open the bowling, and we all know that Ray is a dragger. What do you want him to do to comply with the law? He said, let him bowl a couple of balls and I'll tell you. So Ray bowled a couple of balls, and the umpire said, right, I think that he'll have to put his back foot here, and he puts the marker down about 2 feet behind the bowling crease. Fixed. There was no more problem. None at all.
In the first test at Trent Bridge, Yardley won the toss and chose to bat. The English batting with Hutton, Washbrook, Compton and Edrich was quite strong, but throughout the tour they were seldom able to counter the strength of Australia's bowling, with Keith Miller, Ray Lindwell and the medium pacer Bill Johnston, who matched Ray Lindwell with 27 wickets in the tests and took 100 wickets on the tour.
It was Johnson who got Hardstaff caught in the slips for a blob.
England were all out for 165. Johnston 5 wickets for 36. Australia made 509. Bradman and Hassett both got centuries.
On the last day of the match, Evans and Compton played themselves in again. Off the field through injury and sadly missed by Australia was Ray Lindwell. Miller, the remaining fast bowler, was sent to the boundary by Evans, the ball just beating Johnston after a long chase. Just before lunch, a bumper from Miller made Compton done. He trod on his wicket. A sad end to that magnificent innings of 184. What a reception he got as he came in. Miller himself gave him a pat on the arm. Hutton, Hardstaff and Evans had given wonderful support, but it was principally because of Dennis Compton that England escaped utterly humiliating defeat. The end came soon after lunch. For 4:41, England were all out, leaving Australia to get 98 to win. Barnes and Morris opened. Before very long, Morris was bowled. The BBC then told an amazed cricket world that Bradman was out for a duck. For him, that's a real achievement. But in came Hassett, and the runs were knocked off. There was a comedy finish. At 93, Barnes thought it was all over, grabbed stumps and ran to the pavilion. The mistake discovered, he was brought back, while spectators not quite up in the rules of the game thought he should have been given out. When the wicket was restored, it required 2 more overs, and then the match was won. Victory to the Australians by 8 wickets.
At Lord's in the second test, Arthur Morris made 105 in the first innings. Morris was the batting success of the tour, with 696 runs in the tests at an average of 87. Lindwell took 8 wickets for the match. and Sid Barnes made 141 in the second innings. Australia won by 409 runs.
Play in the third test at Manchester was enlivened by an Old Trafford dog, quite a change from the cat at Lord's. It provided the crowd with a lot of amusement and the Australians with some useful fielding practice. England were definitely on top for once, and both Miller and Lindwall resorted to that type of bowling which has given rise to the greatest controversy that cricket has ever known, the bumper. Is the short ball a legitimate part of the fast bowler's art? Well, Edridge apparently didn't like it much, or the crowd. And Washbrook, who made a great 85 not out, wasn't very happy either.
The third test was cut short by rain, drawn in England's favour. And in the first innings of the fourth test, England made 496.
England took the field after scoring 496, and early successes rewarded our bowlers. Here's Hassett, caught crap, bowled Pollard, 13. And Bradman, clean bowled by Pollard for 33. And Australia's youngest player, Harvey, came to the rescue.
I started off on the green English wickets, which were very strange to me. And after about 3 county games, I was averaging about 7. And, you know, if that happens, you start to get worried about your form and whether you're any good or not. So I wasn't going to talk to Don in those days because, you know, he was up there and I was down there. And Sammy Loxton was my roommate, and he was very friendly with Don. And I said to Sam one day, I said, Sam, do me a favour and go and ask the boss what I'm doing wrong. He said, okay. So he went to Don and said, my little mate's a bit worried about his form. Can you just tell him what's happening with him? Can you help him? And the answer came back the same way. You know, he came back through Sam. He wouldn't tell me directly. And he said, you go back and tell your little mate, he said, if he keeps the ball on the ground, he can't get out. So it's pretty sound advice, I suppose, when you analyse it.
Neil played beautifully in that game. He made a century, had a big partnership with Sammy Loxton. And it was probably the first time that Neil had really matured as a batsman. We could see what a great future he had ahead of him. Played a big part in our success in that game.
As the match progressed and the weather improved, the crowd increased. In fact, as you see, it fairly overflowed. The sun simply blazed down, and the issue of the match was still in doubt when the last day's cricket began. Much depended on our bowlers. The bowling, indeed...
England batted on in the last day. They didn't declare overnight. They batted on so they could get the heavy roller on to help break the pitch up for their spinners. So they batted on for 5 minutes, then we had the 10 minutes between innings. We only had 344 minutes to bat. We needed 404 to win. The wicket wasn't all that brilliant to bat on. You know, it was turning and it was dusty. And Bradman said, come on, we're going to give it a go. So they went out there, and Morrison, he just showed us exactly how to go about it.
Australia won the match with 12 minutes to spare. Morris made 182 and Bradman was 173 not out.
The second day of the final test at the Oval saw England struggling hard to get out of the grip of the disaster that had hit them in that unforgettable first day. The gleam of hope for England was the excellent bowling of Hollis, seen here bowling to Hassett. But over and above anything else in the day's play was the true greatness of the innings of Morris. His century marks him out as the ideal opening batsman, both technically and temperamentally. This left-hander is going to be a great thorn in the side of English cricket for many test matches to come. As the news of his masterly innings was flashed to the other end of the world, the England team began to see that the only way to get him out was to carry him out. But when he'd scored 4 short of the double century, he was run out. A sad finish to a great innings. Hollis then had Talon caught in the slips by Kraft for 31.
And Ring, having scored 9, was taken off Betts' bowling by the same man in the same way. Well, there it was. Australia 389, England 337 behind, as Hutton and Hughes came out to face the bowling of Lindwall and Miller. Young Hughes was proved to be no match for either of them, and Lindwall got him with a slower one at which he played much too early. So it was Hutton and Edwards who played out time, and it looked as if these two might indeed make at least a nuisance of themselves to Australia before the game could be said to be won or lost. But the English summer decided to play 1 or 2 more tricks, and 5 minutes before the official end of play, an appeal against the light was upheld, and the day finished with England 1 wicket down for 54. The third day saw another huge crowd. Hutton tries to sneak a quick one off Lindwall, but Barnes whips it back to Talon. You can't take chances with this Australian fielding. Bill Edrich was bowled by Lindwall, and now it was Dennis Compton's turn to have a go at leg spinner Ring. For a while, Compton and Hutton made things look brighter, but the fate of the last test had already been settled on that first catastrophic Saturday.
The end came quickly. Eric Hollis had a go at one from Johnston and was caught by Morris. England were beaten by an innings and 149 runs. That inglorious defeat was not the final scene we would have chosen for Bradman. He should have said goodbye, carrying his bat for a double century in one last exhibition of his unique art.
Yardley, who is described, Don, as the greatest cricketer of all time, called on the crowd to give him 3 special cheers, which they did with a will.
Don Bradman played his last first-class game back in Australia later that year. The testimonial match for his old friends Alan Kippax and Bert Oldfield was his last game on the Sydney cricket ground. It was a typical Bradman innings. 53 runs in 65 minutes. 42,000 people came to see him bat, and, as usual, the crowd went home happy.